Okay, everybody, welcome back to Art with Mr. G. This time we are concentrating on a third grade project. So in third grade, at this point, we are working on a clay project. We are making clay cupcakes. So I can show you what that looks like. This is a clay cupcake. We've got a bottom. It's got a little bit of a hollow in it. And then we've got a top that goes on top. So it's going to look like this when it's all done. It's all fired and it's all painted. And we actually put Mod Podge on it as well. So I'm going to set that aside and I'm going to show you how we do this. Now if you don't have clay at home, you can get some air dry clay or maybe even use Play-Doh. You can just experiment with it. So what I have is a silicone cupcake tin or cupcake mold, and it takes the shape of this mold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a piece of clay that's about the size of a golf ball, and I'm going to try to make it as round as possible, and then I'm going to place it right in that mold. Then I'm going to do a technique that's called a pinch pot. And what you do with a pinch pot is you rotate this, you use your fingers to rotate it or make it go around in a circle. And as you do this, you gently squeeze with your thumbs. And what that does is it pushes the clay towards the side. Notice I'm rotating it. The clay is starting to come up the sides of the mold here. So you keep continually pressing gently, and then you kind of press back against it with your fingers. And eventually the clay comes all the way up to the top of the mold, of that cupcake mold. I might have used I probably should have used a little more clay because it's barely getting there, but it will get there. So I'm going to even that out a little bit. And what happens is you got to make sure that the clay is pressing against the side all the way up. And again, you're smoothing this out in the middle. I don't know if you can see that. But that's called a pinch pot. And you can do a pinch pot without having this mold on there, and it usually makes like a little half of a circle or a little bowl or a pot. So once you get it like this, you're going to notice that this is round on the bottom because you've been pushing against it, and that silicone or rubber mold is getting pushed out. So if you let that dry, it's going to be wobbly. So what you got to do is you got to give it a couple taps and just flatten out that bottom. Then, making sure that it's round, you take what's called a fettling knife, which is a clay knife. Looks like this. It's sharp enough to cut clay, but it's not as sharp as a kitchen knife. So nobody's going to hurt themselves too bad. It is hard though, so you got to be careful. And what you do is you put this right through the clay, and we're going to go right around, making sure that it's flat on top, and we're going to cut off the excess clay. And that just comes around. And you end up with a flat around the top, all the way around. So you can smooth out anything just using the best clay tool of all times, which is your finger. Just smooth that out real nice, and the bottom is done. You can use a stick tool, something like this, just a pointy stick, to write your initials in the bottom. J, G. Get rid of those crumbs in there. This is JG. Okay. So you set that aside, and now we have to work on the top part, which is this part. I'm showing you a student's work, so this is done by a third grader, so anybody can do this. So you're going to get a larger piece of clay, and, oh, actually, I skipped ahead. We're going to make the bottom of the top of the cupcake, if that makes sense, the bottom of the top. So we're working on the top part, but we have to make a bottom first. So all you need to do is get a little piece of clay and flatten it out. This is called a slab. If you make a slab construction, you're making flat pieces of clay and you're combining them and putting them together. That's called slab construction. There's many different ways you can use clay. You can do the pinch pot, you can do a slab. So I've got this about the thickness of a pancake. You don't want to make it too thin, you don't want a potato chip because it'll break. So you flip it over a couple times to get it flat, and then we're going to use another one of these molds to get the round shape that it needs to be, and then you're going to take a knife, a fettling knife. To fettle is to cut clay or trim clay. So this is called a fettling knife. Don't ask me where that name came from. I don't know if there's a Mr. Fettle out there or not, but this is what it's called. It's a fettling knife. So we're just going to, leaving this in place, we're just going to cut, I like to cut straight lines, and eventually it becomes more of a circle. Just cut off little by little like this, and then when you're done, it's more of a circular motion. You can always push those little corners in so it looks like a circle. So now you've got a circle that's going to fit on here perfectly. Then we get the majority of the clay, probably about 2 golf balls worth, and we're going to start making a coil. So we're going to do coil construction. Coil is like a snake or a noodle. Sometimes they'll extrude a coil. You can put it into this press and squeeze it, and it'll come out as a noodle. Much like, if you remember the Play-Doh pumper. You remember how you used to squeeze that thing and the little Play-Doh would come out in spaghetti noodles? Well, we're going to make a coil construction. So what you do is you just using both hands, you're just going to kind of gently squeeze until you've got like a long hot dog shape. And if it looks like it's thick somewhere, you can give that a little squeeze. If it looks like it's thin, don't squeeze that area. I'm going to set this aside, and I'm going to use my hands to gently, you don't have to push down too hard, otherwise you'll make it flat. You're just going to gently roll it back and forth until it gets nice and smooth like a coil. It should grow a little bit, should get a little bit longer, skinnier. And again, if you can feel that it's thick in some area, then you can just press down a little bit on that area and it should make it all uniform or the same thickness all the way through. Once you've got a nice coil about the thickness of a hot dog or maybe a little thinner, you can start building this top of your cupcake. So you lay it right on top, lay this coil right on top, and you can take your finger, again your best clay tool is your finger, and you can just bring that together. I always call it welding. It's not really welding, but you're bringing 2 pieces of clay together. And then you can gradually walk this into place. Just kind of lead it right on there. And as you get that first layer, then you're going to start to bring it in a little bit closer and a little bit closer, and when you get to the top, you'll just pull that off and you'll have what looks like some whipped topping that was spread on there. Again, if your clay starts to fall apart a little bit, you can use your finger to smooth it out. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect because it's going to be like topping on a cupcake, but try to smooth it out and make it look real pretty. Okay, we can add a cherry to this if we want to on top. But now on the bottom we have to weld this bottom plate onto the topping. So we're just going to use our finger and we're going to bring those two pieces of clay together. Gradually, real nice and neatly. Just going to bring them together, weld them together, and then that will not fall apart at all. So, just about done. We've got to do that over here as well. And you can smooth it out. If it starts to dry out a little bit, you get a little water, and that helps to make it smooth as well. Dip your finger in water and smooth it out with that. Now, we've got the top. What we have to do, really importantly, is where this slab met those coils, there's going to be an air bubble inside of this. So we have to poke a hole through the bottom, and you can feel when it hits the air pocket, it stops pressing back against you. So you've got to make a hole so that when this dries and when you fire it in the kiln, the air doesn't expand and pop and break your piece. So obviously with a cherry, you're just going to roll your clay into a little ball like this, and then you can score it. Score it means you rough it up a little bit. So you score. I'm not doing a very good job with this. It's kind of hard. This clay is drying out a little bit. But then you're going to score where you're going to put it on as well. And then you can't just like, oh, I scored this, so that should work, and just barely put it on there, because it will dry and fall up. You actually have to kind of press it together and kind of twist it on there, and again, make sure that it gets welded on there. Now when you press it, you're probably going to make some fingerprints in there, so you'll have to smooth those out. And then again, you can use your clay tool, your stick tool, to weld that together. So you got to bring that clay together. Make sure that it sticks. I don't know if you can see this real well, but that looks pretty good. And when that's done, if you want to put a little stem on there, I would rather have you use a piece of wire like I did with this one. Put a little piece of wire on there. So what I did is I put a little hole, just poke the stick tool in through the top a little bit, and then we get a wire and we put a little drop of glue in there, and that makes a little stem. So that's how you build it. Then when it dries, here's two that are dry. It pops right out of here. After this dries, it comes right out of this mold real easily. I usually let that sit in that mold for about a day. And then it comes out like this. Now this is dried clay and it's ready to be fired, but it's still very breakable. If I were to drop this, it would break into a lot of pieces. Now this is what it looks like once you fire it. The clay turns white and it turns into ceramic. So now it's hard. It's hard as a rock. And if I were to add water on this or put this in water, it would not come apart. Whereas this clay that's dried out, if I put this in a bucket of water, it would turn into mush. The clay would get back to its normal state of little particles, almost like sand, but way smaller. That's what clay is. So then we fire it, and then we can paint it. This person painted it in nice rainbow colors. The top was painted in rainbow colors as well. And they've got a nice little cupcake that they can store things in. Now, if you don't have these molds and you don't have regular clay, again, you can get some air dry clay. And what I like to do is I like to use the clay and make cool sculptures. And you can just do something abstract, so you can kind of like just use your hands and smooth it out. This clay is really dry, but you can, maybe poke a hole through it and just kind of experiment with the clay and work it until you've got something that you think is a really cool shape. I'll show you some examples that I did. This one I did with some brown clay, and this is just it's totally just an abstract sculpture. If you look at it from different angles, it looks interesting. This is something that one of the most famous sculptors of all time, his name's Henry Moore, and you can look him up on the internet, and he's got some really cool sculptures, but a lot of them are just organic forms. And one of the things that he used to say is he likes to look at it from all angles, and it's got to look interesting from all angles. So that's one of my examples. Here's another one that's kind of interesting. Again, I just took a piece of clay and just kind of squeezed it and moved it into different directions. When you look at it from this angle, it kind of looks like a face. If you look at it, this is the nose, and then the mouth is down here. So it's kind of abstract, like a Pablo Picasso sculpture. It's got some interesting ins and outs, and the positive space, which is the clay, is equally as interesting as the negative space, which is the space around it. So I'll put that down as well. And then one other one. This one kind of reminded me of coral after I glazed it and painted it. So it's just, again, it's got holes in it I made with my finger, and I just fired that clay, and then I put what's called glaze on it, so it turns it real shiny and colorful. It kind of reminds me of like a piece of coral that you might see in the ocean or in a fish tank with little fishes swimming through it. So those are fun things you can do with clay. Third graders, if you're at home, quarantined for a week or two and you need to do something, get out some clay, get some air dry clay or some Play-Doh or something like that, and have fun with it. All right, thanks for listening, guys. Talk to you later.